as I mentioned in my previous Necromancy overview video, Necromancy is the new combat style. That means there's also a new highest combat level. Can you guess what it is? That's right, we're raising the dead from 138 and we're going to new heights of level 152. How exciting. Let's dive into Necromancy combat and how it works and why it is so cool. After completing the tutorial, you were given a Death Guard and a Skull Lantern, along with your Death Warden robes. Necromancy is a dual-wield combat style, for now at least, and all of your gear is upgradable over a series of quests and material gathering, all the way up to tier 90. And tier 95 will be available on launch, however. Someone said something about a boss fight? Anyway, Necromancy starts you off with an auto attack that's essentially also a basic ability. Left-clicking enemies will do decent damage and grant you adrenaline. This acts as your filler ability when you don't have anything else to press, and the game casts it automatically. And the idea from the devs is that letting the game do stuff for you will be decent, but actively pressing buttons will most likely be better. So, do try and press your buttons if you can. As for abilities, we have Touch of Death and Soul Sap. These are the two stacking abilities that you unlock fairly early on. Touch of Death applies a stack of Necrosis to your character every time you use it, and these Necrosis stacks will be consumed when casting the Finger of Death ability, dealing more damage if you are over a certain number of stacks, and then it depletes them. Think of it sort of like Magic's Rack and Ruin, although you can cast Finger of Death even with no stacks, it just won't do as much damage. Every time you cast Soul Sap, you will gain a soul, visible with the new icons above your head. So if you were wondering what those are, then, that's what they are. They're your souls. And with these souls, you have two choices. Firstly, you can consume a soul and use Soul Strike, which will stun your opponent. This will consume one soul, but it doesn't have a cooldown. So technically, if you had 3 souls stacked up, you could do 3 stuns back to back to back. Watch out, any stunnable enemies. Alternatively, you could decide to cast a volley of souls. You can probably guess what this one does, but it's essentially, the more souls you have stacked, the more damage you will do. This one consumes all souls on cast, so, use it carefully, because if you need to stun something soon, then this is not the ability you want to be using. Now, let's talk about conjures. These are your spooky friends that will help you out during combat and will deal a significant portion of your overall damage. In order to summon these guys, you will first need to acquire some of the new runes introduced with Necromancy. To get them, you'll need to soulify your pure essence with a ritual. Then you can take this essence to the beautiful new rune crafting area and craft your desired runes there. This place acts similar to a normal runecrafting altar, and you can craft multiple runes based on your runecrafting level, so you'll get lots of the lower tier runes, but fewer of the higher tier ones. These runes will also let you cast incantations, which include your conjures, but also an ability called Bone Shield that will let you use defensive abilities without needing to equip a shield. These spells have quite long durations, especially when upgraded in the talent tree, so it might be an idea to cast it before entering a boss fight to gain access to your shield abilities. And now for conjures. There are 3 types of conjures on launch, and first up we have the skeletons, and they're pretty basic. They will attack your target, and they also gain buffs at certain thresholds based on how many attacks they have done, and this includes attacking faster, or if you get max stacks, every hit they do will be a critical strike, so lots of potential damage if you can stack them up. You can reactivate this ability after casting to make them attack faster. Bloats deal necromancy and AoE poison damage to your enemies over a long duration. This ability can be reactivated to make them explode for a large amount of damage. Ideally, you would explode them just before they're about to expire in order to maximize DPS. I was a bit of an idiot, and I didn't read the tooltips well enough in this one, so basically every time I used them again instantly, so I was losing out on a ton of damage, because I got, I got some burst with the explosion, but unfortunately that means I didn't get the long AoE poison necromancy damage, so I messed up. And then we have Wraiths, and Wraiths will heal you for a portion of the damage that they deal. And reactivating these Wraiths gives them a stacking buff, which is present on an enemy, and every attack that then hits that enemy does extra damage. And the more attacks that your Wraith do to that enemy, the more stacks you get, and the more extra damage each attack that you do does. Hope that makes sense. These conjures have fixed durations that can be extended with another incantation that consumes a large amount of your life points in order to increase the duration of your spooky friends. This means it'll be much easier to get the max stacks of your skeleton guys, and they'll do a ton of damage when they get that far. Combining the basic abilities with these conjures are they're really just the bread and butter of Necromancy. And don't forget that a large amount of abilities and ability upgrades are available from the Necromancy talent tree. You'll feel significantly stronger each time you unlock one. They make a huge difference. There are other cool abilities and incantations unlocked later on. This includes an ability that can mark targets for death, and it executes them when they drop below a certain amount of HP, assuming that was from Necromancy damage anyway. Also, there's a big blood siphon that does a large amount of AoE damage and also heals you. There's a nifty looking scythe that can hit things in front of you, dealing more damage against stunned targets, and a metamorphosis style ultimate ability that buffs several of your other Necromancy abilities for a duration, and several more that I didn't find enough time to play with properly. So there's a hell of a lot to play with, a lot to theorycraft, and you know, on a basic level, it can be really basic if you want it to be. But if you want to master Necromancy, I reckon it's going to be quite a challenge. Should be good fun. So one thing we discovered while we were playtesting is that Necromancy was generally quite low on damage compared to other styles. However, this problem was, you know, partly a skill issue, most likely. In other words, we didn't quite understand how to do optimal damage. But also partly because the later spells just didn't seem quite balanced yet. So I'm sure release day will be different. We were almost certainly playing on an underpowered version of the skill so far. We did find something rather interesting though. The poison build, you may have heard of it, you know, Bit Clack or Bit Glacier, Bit Carapac. The poison build was incredibly strong because all the hits that your conjures do also apply your own poison procs. This meant that the combat style actually felt really quite good at poisonable bosses, but also lackluster at ones that weren't poisoned. We raised this as an issue though, so hopefully they'll find a way to make it feel better at all bosses. Well, yeah, it just goes to show how important playtesting really is. And again, guys, do not panic about all this. I'm sure numbers will be buffed and changed and everything before release. This is just an early playtest after all, and I wouldn't panic invest in poison because I wouldn't be surprised if that were to get changed as well. So it was really interesting seeing mine and RS guys' progress on Solak on day 1 versus day 2. The kills were naturally a bit slower because our conjures didn't like switching targets to the core, so it took multiple cycles to kill. But again, this is something that will be fixed. Our conjures will have brains in the future, so do not fret. But on day 1 we did a single kill, and I even had to quickly put on J-mod invincibility because I messed up and procced my Ring of Death. But we managed to just barely finish in 16 minutes, with our conjures finishing it off in the final moments. The next day, however, after having some necromantic thoughts swirling around our heads all night, we came back the next day and we smashed it down to 8 minutes already, and I'm sure with some more practice and strategy, we'd have that down even lower. Remember again that this is with the underpowered higher level abilities. I would not be surprised if we could knock down to 5 minutes or so. I really, yeah, I could see that happening if the higher abilities were buffed a bit. So 2 more abilities that I don't think I touched on, and I also didn't really use that much, but they are probably quite good. One is the Split Soul ability, which is essentially the Eldritch Crossbow special attack, where you do damage to a boss, and the damage that you would have healed from Soul Split is instead dealt as damage to your enemy, but it's quadrupled, so it's a bit nicer. That's a necromantic spell apparently, so we get to play around with that. And then one more ability is the Living Death ability. I didn't play with this too much, but it is an ultimate ability, and it turns you into a spooky skeleton. And what it does is it enhances several of your other necromantic abilities, specifically the ones that stack. Well, some of them anyway. So it'll make your auto attacks will also generate a necrosis stack. Pretty cool. The Touch of Death ability will generate more adrenaline. The Finger of Death ability will deal extra damage. So that means, you know, when you do your Touch of Death and then do your Finger of Death, kind of like spamming those two over and over could be really, really good, because it will do a lot of damage while in this form. And another thing is the Death Skulls ability, which we also didn't mention. It's like a bunch of skulls that fly around and attack things. Being in this form will make it attack more, so that's quite exciting. A lot of potential damage with this. But the way I kind of found it was you kind of had to kind of choose between what you wanted to do for the most part. It's like, do you want to summon minions and make them your powerful allies and go ham with them, or do you want to do a more, you know, non-minion approach and kind of go for the Living Death ability? There is probably some room in there with specific rotations to kind of get both of them in a little bit. But yeah, I didn't end up using this one too much, but it was really cool when I did. But yeah, this is not one that I understand too well right now. So we'll have to do a bit of further testing when release happens. All in all, bossing is very doable with Necromancy and incredibly fun. It's great watching all your minions do their thing and buffing them up to make them stronger. The way your spells interact with one another is satisfying, and there are certain abilities that excel in specific situations. But there we have it. There has been your little introduction into Necromancy combat. We have a lot to learn when release day comes, but the steady speed at which you unlock abilities should make that process simple. As long as you remember to read, of course. Please read the abilities, guys. Please read them. Thank you for watching, though, and I hope you are just as excited for Necromancy release as I am. It's going to be fantastic.